We are live.
We are live.
I'm Edison.
Whoa. And I'm Chris.
And this is the science of tanks, or tanks and thanks.
Oh, yeah. I
Hello, we
suppose.
are back again. I am actually Chris. Sorry, that was I couldn't let Edison just have a chill day.
And I'm Edison, so, it would have been even funnier if I was still wearing my name tag.
That would have been really great, actually, in fact. And then someone from the mental hospital down the street pulls me out of the bedroom. Okay, Chris, let's take you back home.
Let's get you back in your jacket.
Uh, um. Anyway, speaking of straitjackets, Edison, how has your week been?
Why do you assume I've been in a straitjacket?
I don't know. I
I
assume
mean,
that
I
you're
guess I
busy
am.
like I am.
Uh, by busy, I mean, like, donating plasma for fish.
Yes, sacrifice your body for money.
Yeah, so now I can say this tank, I put blood, sweat, and tears. At least parts of my blood into it. As far as the financial cost, I don't know.
So why did you need to start donating plasma for the tank? Tell our viewership what was the necessity.
Well, because it's saltwater. It's expensive, and somebody wanted some tangs, so now I have two tang.
Does your wife want the tangs?
She doesn't really care what I put in there, just as long as I don't get another tank.
So that somebody was you.
Yes,
You've done this to yourself.
I know.
Well, it's a good
But
thing that today we're going to talk about overstocking.
hey, it doesn't look like overstocked. I mean, like you can see fish moving, but it's not like overstocked.
Sure. Yeah, we
I,
are going to debunk that very quickly for you.
well,
Um
all
yes.
right. What have you been up to?
Uh, before I talk about me, I just wanted to let you know, viewers, we may or may not be interrupted by a guest of some sorts. We found another co-host, and he might come today. He might not. We'll see. He said he was available, so maybe we'll see. But we'll get there when we get there. No, so this week, to those that don't know, I feel like this is another just expose of my life that someone can dissect and just be like, this is how he sucks. I am being a so first off, to those wondering, I still haven't heard back from the Akron Zoo as a freshwater keeper. They love me. They really want me. I guarantee it. But their HR manager decided to go on vacation, and so she won't be back till tomorrow. So I don't know. They did say that I should expect to fly out there, though. They didn't invite me to do it, but they said the third round of interviews involves you coming out here, and we usually try to fly you out here, and we want to make that happen for you. So, um, again, not confirmed, but they said things.
I mean, if
Things
it's
are
third
good.
round and you got to fly out there, it's pretty serious.
Yeah, at some point they were like, we're gonna waste $500, $600 on a round trip ticket for this man. So at some point they're probably
So you
thinking,
thinking like it's like when no, never mind. I'm not gonna make that comparison.
sure, do not spring up anything that will get us canceled.
No, I was just like when you're dating and it's like between two people and it's like A or B. It's like by the ring,
Yeah.
which finger does it fit on? I guess.
Yep. Oh yeah. Um. Anyway, until that happens, though, I started a new job today, which puts me up to, let's count it, 1, 2 full-time jobs at the same time. So 80 hours worth of work each week, because I don't want to be stuck in an apartment forever. And I want money and stonks. But to those that are unaware, I work as a news editor now for Channel 8 News here in Idaho Falls. It's part of the Gazette NPG company for broadcasting, and it's very chillax. I found out today. I will do nights basically there, and for the night, basically, I edit everything for the day later, and so there's not a huge stress for time in the way of like, no, you have to get it all edited before noon because that's when the next broadcast is. No, my next broadcast for me is at 5 a.m. in the next morning, so I have time.
So you got 5 till 5 a.m., you know?
Well, I'm off at 11, but yeah, till 5 a.m.
So don't do any editing till 10.
Okay, sure.
Push it all off to the last minute. That's, you know.
No, no, don't do that.
Do Wednesday? Do Wednesday.
Wednesday's even harder because we have every single editor there all at once for like 4 hours.
Ooh,
And
fun.
there's not enough desks. They only have like 2 editing desks. So like, what am I going to do? Sit on the floor, twiddle my thumbs, and wait for something to happen?
I mean, my dad was the service guy for like an audiovisual company, and they kept offering him a desk, and he's like, I don't need a desk. So he's like, I'll take that chair.
Yes,
So anytime he's in the office, that was his chair.
that's a smart move, Dad. That is a very smart move.
Yeah.
Um, outside of that, still working for the zoo. I'm still doing education stuff until September, but that's been my life kind of for a little while. Yeah. Does it hurt me inside that I make $2.30 more an hour to do something that I didn't get my degree in? Yes. Yes, it does. But
Get a degree, don't use it.
yeah, have to pay for it anyway. Yeah. Anyway, this week we are talking about overstonks,
Overstonks.
and Fish Fam is finally here.
Yay.
Hello. I know that they can't hear me, but I love them anyway. So it's,
We love our viewers.
well, Fish Fam is not a viewer technically.
Okay. But Empire of
bot.
Dirt is.
Okay, Jeff is. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi,
We
Jeff.
love you.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah. This week we are going to actually cover overstocking versus different types of carrying capacity. I like to use the word carrying capacity. Edison, how are you on the word carrying capacity?
That works for me. I'll figure it out.
Are you against it, or are you flooring for it?
I'm just like, how many fish you go in tank? That's kind of where I'm at.
The Science of Tanks is our channel.
Carrying capacity sounds great.
How many fishy go in tank?
Yes, you heard me.
Okay. You didn't stutter. Did I stutter? No, so I kind of wanted to start with saltwater versus freshwater. Well, actually, I don't want to start with that. I just realized. I think what I really want to start with is yawning. No, I think what I really want to start with is what different types of carrying capacity is there? What are the 3 main types, Edison?
Well, so there's going to be like physical space limitations, right? You can only shove so many fish in so much space. There's only so much volume in a tank, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's
Eventually
physical.
Physical. There's chemical, biological, if you will, because fish pee, and that ammonia has to go somewhere. So as long as you're not like overfeeding, over ammonia producing, then your tank can handle it, and then it's like, okay.
The last one.
I don't know what the last one you're thinking of is. Is it perhaps aggression based?
It is. What would aggression fall under? Is it a chemical thing?
No, it's not a chemical thing. It would be a well, I guess it's a chemical thing if you want to get really sciencey about it.
Kind of, but that's too sciencey. It's a
To
behaviorally.
behavioral. Okay. I
So
was
to
gonna say
put
something like social.
Yeah, so the three ones, I will give you an example of each of them. Okay. So the first one, physical. What is a species of fish that gets far too big for the tanks that are usually put in?
Goldfish.
How big is a goldfish when you first buy it?
Teeny tiny.
Itty bitty. How big can a goldfish get?
Uh, about 15 inches.
I've seen the max 24, but I guess that's kind of crossing the line from a goldfish to a koi.
Yeah, I think it's like it's normally distributed, so you know,
Yes.
bell curve.
Perfect bell curve
Perfect bell curve.
of 15 inches. Anyway, so you cannot put 15 inches of thing in only a 10 inches of tank. It just
Doesn't work out.
not possible. Can't do it. Just can't do it at all. Right?
Well, the good news for that poor goldfish is that it probably won't get to 15 inches because if somebody has it in too small of a tank, they likely don't have a filter.
So
So
you're saying that the goldfish will die before it gets the chance to grow up.
yeah,
That's dark, man. It's Monday. People don't come to our podcast to learn dark things like this.
it's science.
Oh, sure. You could keep telling yourself that. It's fine. Um, Second example. Chemical. How much waste someone says before it gets the chance to have its spine stunted?
Yeah, so it's the ammonia will kill it long before its organ damage will.
Yeah, it's
Well, I
true.
guess organ damage will come from ammonia poisoning anyway, but that's another.
That's another topic. Okay. Second example. We chemically, when we talk, honestly, it's a kindness. Ammonia
Right.
poisoning is
That's
not a
what-
kindness. I feel bad.
I don't
Anyway,
know. Painful in 5 minutes or painful in 5 years?
yeah, kind of. I'd rather just stab him in the operculum, to be honest. But um, anyway, second example is chemical. I have a dirty fish, and it puts too much beneficial bacteria into the tank, and you don't change your water. And fish stay dirty because fish continues to eat same things. Eventually, too much beneficial bacteria means
Not beneficial.
not beneficial, which means things either explode or die. So,
Well, and then not to mention, there's people that have too many fish in their tank, and it's like whether or not there's ammonia or nitrite present, there's still going to be like massive amounts of nitrates, and it's like I can, you hear people like I cannot get my nitrate down. Well, how many fish do you have in your small tank?
your cycle is working, but it's working too fast, which means that you have too much stuff.
Oh,
Interesting.
right.
Yeah. So here in Idaho, salmon. I don't want to say okay. So it's probably the same in most other game states like the Great Lakes, but in Idaho, right, we have a city called Salmon for a reason, and so that's kind of the way that they do it is they have constant stream tanks, but they're not stream tanks the way that you're thinking because usually people they think they have a power head running one way and then the overflow on the other side and it goes back around, right? No, their tanks are like tubes, literally, with a through flow system hooked around it with a bunch of pipes running through on the other side. And Here in Idaho, we do a lot of studies with stuff like that. In fact, for my ichthyology class, we had to do a study like that. It was part of our like final project was you have to go and get a fish and put it through a through flow system to see what happens. People don't trust. How do I put this delicately? People don't trust college students with salmon because salmon are protected. It definitely is an undersized container still, definitely, Jeff. But people don't trust us college students with a bunch of salmon, so we actually did it with goldfish. And goldfish don't like through flow systems usually. By the way, I don't know if you guys found that out, but they like slow moving cold water. Anyway, and we found that while salmon are usually unaffected, they can do perfectly fine. Goldfish, how do they die very quickly? They lay down and just get sucked down the tube until they can't get out, and then they'll die.
That sounds like goldfish behavior.
Yeah, it is proper goldfish behavior. It is truly the pinnacle of goldfish behavior. Anyway, the downside to those through flow systems is they are not closed systemed at all. In fact, they have a recharger continually that empties and then goes back through, which means you're dealing with perfect water the entire time.
Not somebody's tiny 1 gallon bowl, if that, without a filter or anything.
Yeah. And that's just because there's already so many other variables when you're dealing with biologic studies, right? If I wanted to go, yes, goldfish are derpy and we love them.
Love them so much.
If I wanted to go and measure the amount of CO2 that a specific population of salmon gives off at a time of year during reproduction, there is not only the fact that my instrumentation of doing that, like studying the actual stuff, is automatically bad, right? Because you can't account to having every instrument, like, you know. I don't. Edison, can you read that? I'm struggling right now.
Koro's basically saying any fish fish don't grow to the size of the tank, they just grow to the size that they grow to. However, if I'm not mistaken, fish will, like goldfish, will get stunted in a small enough tank, but their organs keep growing. If that's my understanding, but I'm not sure.
I don't know specifically for scaled fishes, but I do know that scaleless fishes and things from like chondrichthyes, so sharks, rays, those kinds of things. Rays and sharks grow to available space in the way that their soft tissue and cartilage doesn't. It has hormones that turn on and off depending on the amount of available size around them, right? So that's why in some parts of Atlanta, Florida, the deep South area, you can get stingrays that are, 4 feet in wingspan, basically, from edge to edge. But a little bit further up the river, you can't get that. So, it's crazy that we can farm salmon in a tube. The perfect size for them is a concept. Yeah. And here in Idaho, like I said, it's people make big money off of salmon, and it's not because of fishing. It's not because of that. We have the Snake River Aquifer, which is the fastest moving aquifer in the United States. It pumps out 400 or something gallons per second, and that equates to like 14,000 ish gallons per day, right? Or hour. No. Yeah, per hour. And so, and not to mention all of that water comes out at the exact same temperature because it's taking the Yellowstone hotspot heat and dissipating it through the aquifer very quickly. It's like a giant radiator. And so it makes it perfect for us to restock and do a bunch of aquaculture things here in Idaho. But um, our salmon eat a lot of bread too, because a lot of people recycle bread and they'll throw it into the river and whatever. And anyway, so they're big chonky boys. Anyway, getting
Right.
back onto keep going.
Yeah, coming back full circle.
Full circle.
Behavioral overstonk is going to look more like, you have guppies that are suddenly aggressive.
What about a good example of this? How do you find out without seeing that you have put 2 male Poecilidae fish in a tank?
How do you what?
How do you know that you put 2 males together without seeing the actual appendages on the males?
Oh, they're gonna nip at each other, aren't they?
Yeah, they're mean. Live bears are just mean fish when it comes to males on males, because they want to be the one to they practice not androcity. What's the other side of that?
Oh, like male dominance.
Not male dominance, because they don't display. They do sometimes, right?
But
So
it's
that's
like they
how.
have to be the dominant male. Like
Yeah,
it's
that's why they are aggressive. It's because the females in nature, they have 5 females to 1, which it's not promiscuity. It's mono a mono Poecilidae edition. Yes, let's bring it on. Let's do this, Cora. Let's go. Square up. The it's not. Is it part paragosity? What's the scientific name for female or ovum
uh
or egg carrying?
egg carrying.
I know it's not parthenogenesis. Parthocity? Parthenogosity? It's multiple females to 1 male. The male, his job is to be the one to impregnate every single female that he can, right? Because it's parthenogenic. There you go. See, thanks, Koro. He's smart. The male, it's his job, right, to impregnate as many females as he can. And that's honestly the case for humans too, right? We don't need as many males as we do on this earth. In fact, the entire country of China is suffering because of this, because they decided that, the one child rule basically made it so all of the girls born in China were adopted out and only males stayed, which means you had a lack in the gender you need for a population versus the gender that you have. So, in the cases of our live bearers, right, they actively will kill or try to wound anything that is against their ability to reproduce, right? Because they're K-selected. K-selected meaning high birth counts, very low parental investments, etc. And most fish, actually, I'm pretty sure all fish except for sharks and like marine mammals, but those don't count. But sharks and chondrichthyes are not. They have a high parental investment. All fish basically are K-selected in the way that, like, they have as many babies as they can, as fast as they can, because speed and the amount of a population is the most important parts of having a working population. And so you don't need more males for that. You need more females. And the males want to pass on their genetics, which means behaviorally in a tank that has either one female to multiple males, or no females and all males, or in some cases, just an imbalance, so more males than females, or even sometimes all females, right? Because females, they have a natural desire to become pregnant and have offspring, right? To reproduce, because that's their goal, right? Is to have a genetic event or a genetic reproduction or genetic continuation. Um, and so a lot of live bears do a really good example of showing just how behaviorally hard it is to keep something in a tank that is smaller, right? Because if you don't have space for the males to separate, well, they're going to be next to each other and they're going to see each other and they are going to fight nonstop with each other, right? Until one of
So
them dies.
it's basically like how you can have a sorority, a beta sorority, but not a beta fraternity.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because beta fraternities, their job is to be the male
Be
and
the male. Yeah.
the male, and you cannot beat the male with other males. So
Right. So unless you have like a 75-gallon, you probably don't want two male betas. So you can overstock a tank behaviorally with two fish.
even no matter what the size of the tank, too,
Yeah.
you could overstock a tank with two fish with cichlids,
Mm-hmm.
and they could both be male convict cichlids easily.
Yeah.
Or two male Oscars in the same tank? No, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's a bad idea.
Then that would be a overstocked tank behaviorally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's that's
we should
that's
just bring Koro on. Koro, do you want to come on? He's probably in his PJs and just sitting in bed.
I would be in my PJs. I'm still in my work clothes. I got home from work like what, 5 hours ago.
Mondays are my only day off, so that's probably the only day I won't be wearing work clothes. I'm a bit busy, but otherwise, yeah. All right, Koro. You're out of it this time. It's okay.
Give you a
We'll
pat.
allow it. No, so those are the three. I could give you 30 minutes, is what he says.
Sure, why not?
Get him on.
Get him on.
Have him. Why don't you DM us and then we will send you info. But while Edison is doing that, we're going to talk about the three different types of carrying capacity, right? When we're talking about carrying capacity, we're talking about things that affect the fish when it comes to their longevity of life, right? Because carrying capacity historically, especially in ecology, has always been measured as birth rates and death rates, right? So whether or not your birth rate or death rate is equal or the same. I think Edison is trying to track it.
I'm trying to find him. Do I have to?
Why don't
I
you
don't know
just
how.
have him? Why don't you have
Why
him
don't I
email
just?
us?
Yeah. Why don't I just? Go on my laptop instead of my.
Phone? Yeah.
Yeah.
What a concept, Edison.
Yep.
No, so when push comes to shove, right? When we are talking about this, we are talking about carrying capacity being the point where the birth rates of a population or the birth rates of things is equal to the death rates of that population. This is a very common concept in ecology. And that these are the causes of those differences in that population, right? And it's interesting to me then why so many people, especially here, I don't know if it's the same in Utah, I don't know if it's the same in Michigan, I don't know if it's the same anywhere else, but especially here, people give out fish pretty regularly, like all the time, and people foster fish all the time. And I know what my carrying capacity is because I don't want to say I have live bears for a reason, but they are a very good indicator species to tell, okay, I have too many fish, right? Because they will grow, their population grows to the available space, food, chemistry, behaviors, etc., right? And so you'll know by the end of it, hey, my population is stable. Another good example would be like corridoras. Corridoras are awesome for stuff like this. Mind you, they're a little more difficult to show because they are extremely thanks, Edison.
Yeah.
And then we'll send the invite to you, Koro. And then but they will show you know, that you're putting too much food in, or that the chemistry is hitting its maximum peak point. Now, my question is, and Edison, you might be able to you know, work on this, but also Koro might be able to shed some light on this too. At what point do you know, like, how do you predict what carrying capacity, what your stocking should be for reaching carrying capacity, reaching the maximum 100% or 85%? How do you predict that?
So it depends. What kind of stocking are we talking about? Are we talking chemical? Are we talking chemical slash biological? Are we talking behavioral? Are we talking physical? Because you
Let's,
have to
I mean,
consider
let's do the easiest one first, okay? We'll do physical, right? That
physical.
one's fairly easy to understand when it comes to stocking, right? So,
Right. So like let's take zebra danios for example. You want to put them in like at least a 20-gallon tank so they have enough room to swim around. Once you have too many fish in there that they can't do fishy things, you have too many fish in fish tank. Does is that
how,
making sense?
yeah. So when we talk about it physically, too many fish in a fish tank means they can't do fishy things. They can't exhibit, or in this case, they inhibit active behavior or natural behaviors. How do you estimate that? Do
For
I
me,
do yeah, do I go out and go buy 100 Danios and then just do it? I mean,
and honestly,
yeah, I mean,
like and the physical size is going to be harder to reach with smaller fish in a bigger tank than so if you put like a 4-inch fish in a 20-gallon tank, it's going to be hard to overstock it physically with those fish before you hit like biological or behavioral overstocking. um, but if we're talking like let's go with the inch per gallon rule, it starts breaking down over maybe about like 4 or 5 inches of fish,
mhm.
because let's take the goldfish for example. It gets to be 15 inches. So that means I can put it in a 15-gallon tank, right?
Would not recommend.
So basically, you have to keep an eye on, well, how big does this fish get, and how much room is, how wide is my tank? Because they care more about floor space than they do about vertical space.
It's true. Yeah, so I guess the only way to predict that is trial and error, unfortunately. But it's you for physical, right? You can't predict how a fish is going to grow until, I don't want to say it grows, but until it grows, right?
Right. And so usually the best option to avoid overstocking physically is to do your research and get smaller fish than your tank.
I'm looking at you, people who bought Chinese algae eaters. Exactly, straight to prison, 100 years.
Or buy a goldfish for a small tank. You know, they get 15 inches. You can't put it in a 20-gallon tank. It's just not going to work like that.
Yeah. So
Like long term, you can put it
yeah,
in there for
long
like a
term, yeah,
grow tank,
for a
obviously.
grow out tank, right? But the fact of remains is eventually it will reach carrying capacity for physical carrying capacity. Now let's take a look at behavioral, because that's the second. That's
I
the
did
Yeah.
want to point out what Koro mentioned, that there's maths and like there are some rules like I brought up, like the gallon inch per gallon rule. Um, there are some rules of thumb and like online calculators that can kind of give you an idea, but
Mhm.
really the best way to avoid overstocking your tank physically is to just do research and get smaller fish.
It's always easier to have smaller fish in a bigger tank than it is to have bigger fish in too small of a tank. So I'd also say not only on top of doing your research, but if you ever want to get into the hobby, a good way to do it is having a bigger tank than a smaller tank, even though. Are you moving them directly into another tank, Jeff? Because that's the only option. I could foresee you doing that.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
It's well, okay, sure. If you ask the, I don't want to say no. I'm not. So I don't want to say if you ask an ichthyologist this question, they would be like, yeah, it's fine because there's just surface agitation, and you can get the. I mean,
Nah, keep an Oscar in it.
yeah, 100. Why not? Let's do it.
Again,
That's
physically overstocking, that's a little different.
that's why I like the YouTube, not the YouTube channel, the Facebook group. Sir, that's a cup, not a tank. It's one of my favorites. When we talk about behavioral, right, overstocking, what are some things that we can do to predict behavioral overstocks?
Know your fish. Know your fish. So like we were talking about with live bears, if you have one male and like 100 females, you could put those all in a 55-gallon tank and they would be fine. But if you have like 100 males in a 55-gallon tank, it's going to behaviorally overstock. So you basically just have to think about like, well, how big is the tank? How much decoration? Can I get these fish to claim their own territory? Or is it going to be a problem where these fish are going to become territorial and attack each other?
Yeah. So knowing your fish is first step. Second step would be, I guess, visiting your goals, right? Because it might not be a behavioral bad thing if you have two fish duke it out every once in a while, right? Because what if that's part of the breeding process, right? What if you had cichlids and they needed to duke it out in order to figure out, hey, no, this is my tank versus another tank, right?
Well, also like saltwater clownfish,
Oh yeah, by far.
the dominant one becomes the female. They have to figure out, well, who's the female in this harem?
Yeah, exactly. So things like that too, where you have to know your plan, you have to know your fish. But I'd also say knowing what behavioral signs to look for when it gets too much too, right? So knowing what active aggression looks like versus pecking order aggression, right? Is this fish getting chased out and thrown up over, the, side of the tank?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, usually that's true, right? So that's why we hatch cichlids in those little bubbler containers too.
That is interesting. I did not know that.
Because you have a lot more anyway. Um
Well, regardless, you behaviorally, if you're going to take risks, behavioral stalking wise, you need to have a backup plan. That's like the third thing I would say is have a backup plan in place. If a fish is going to die, a fish has got to get out.
Give it space. Yeah, I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. One of the things that irked me so bad about the aquarium was we had a saltwater cube. It was 56 gallons. It was always dirty. So it's not like it was the best place in the world for thriving environments. But it had 4 clownfish in it. And the 4 clownfish decided one day that they were going to, yo,
What's up?
there he is.
You were talking about a saltwater cube?
Yeah, so we had a saltwater cube at the aquarium, and it was constantly overstocked biologically, chemically, and behaviorally. But when they had a clownfish that was consistently getting picked on, they were like, okay, we're just going to go put it in this, tank with other fish. When in actuality, that clownfish was probably near death anyway. So putting it in a tank with other fish that will do the exact same thing, not as aggressive as the clownfish, but definitely, hey, you're a new fish, you're in my space. What the heck are you doing? Yeah, that's not beneficial. And so having a place to put it by itself so that way the aggression stops and it has a chance to recoup is vital.
Well, and that's why quarantine tanks are like essential to maintaining aquariums. If you're planning on adding fish to your aquarium at some point, you want to have a quarantine tank so that if something gets sick, if something, if something comes up like the behavioral overstocking, you can start shedding the load essentially.
Well, and even before something happens, if you're quarantining a fish ahead of time and you're not doing the bare minimum quarantine, but you're actually like observing your fish and keeping them in there for 2+ weeks or something like that, the fish will acclimate to the quarantine tank and you'll get a feeling for what kind of behaviors you might see that fish exhibit, that particular individual fish, because every fish, unfortunately, is an individual.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
That makes life.
It's definitely true, right? Even for someone from my standpoint, right, where I work for AZA facilities, that's one of the things they look out for. Like, they asked me in my interview questions this last week for freshwater keeper, they were like, so you come into work in the morning, what's the first things you do? I look at the fish physically, I look at the fish behaviorally, right? Because you should know your fish, right? And they will tell you signs of, hey, this is going on. And hopefully, just like Carl said, you should be able to catch like when something is amiss well before it becomes threatening to that fish.
Yeah, you're going to see behavioral changes before you see tattered fins. And then you're going to see tattered fins before you see the infection kick in. You know, it's something like fin nipping, as simple as that is.
Yeah, I agree. That leads us into our last one, though. The hardest one for people to at least understand, comprehend, but also the most important, obviously, because it's also the most, it's the thing that ends up killing the most fish.
Right, and this one's chemical biological carrying capacity of a tank is usually the easiest to overstock it. If you don't have enough filtration, like one thing, those hang on back filters are great because they're cheaper, they're convenient, they're not like messy, and they don't really take up space in your tank. However, I hate that they just have like a tiny cartridge. That thing doesn't carry a lot of fish.
Yeah.
And they rate it based on flow rate.
Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Even if you were to like hot rod it or whatever and fill it up with your own media and you're not using those little cartridges that are arguably a scam by the industry, right? Even if you're doing, you're hot rodding your hang on back, depending upon the hang on back, there's not a lot of volume back there. There's only so much room.
Yeah. And it's also flow rate too, right? That's what they're rated off of first off, but like if you hot rod it, how is that affecting the flow rate that you already know, right? So if I have a Whisper 10 and I say, okay, this is a little hang on that's for this 10-gallon tank, it's going to do 10 gallons per hour. You overstock the hang on back with a bunch of stuff, or you just don't change it, right? You don't clean your media, it gets clogged up. Now your Whisper 10 turns into a Whisper 5, which means biologically you cannot sustain what you used to be able to sustain.
The good news is, though, is that then generally what these filters do is they basically get it to where everything else in the tank becomes filter media because every surface can host beneficial bacteria as long as there's a sufficient flow over it.
Yeah, it's true. There are people who I know that let their filters get to the point where they no longer have sufficient flow, and then it's like you're doing more harm than good. But carrying capacity is a really weird thing too, because in the hobby as well as professionally, right, when we do active like chemical testing for aquarium tanks, right, AZA doesn't have a guideline. They're not like, okay, it needs to be underneath this amount of nitrates. It needs to be within a specific range for the fish that you have in it, but it's not like a very specific, this is the actual thing that I'm shooting for, right? And so the issue that I find, and a lot of people find, is, oh, I'm just going to keep doing a, I'm going to keep up with a water change schedule, but my tank's nitrates are incredibly high. I'm looking at you, cichlid owners, specifically. But like they'll do this schedule and it doesn't do anything, right? The fish are not really affected, but it's not is that tank overstocked? Technically, yes, because the nitrates are freaking ridiculous.
Well, and nitrates are a really good indicator, because if you do, from my point of view, this hobby should be a hobby. It should be something fun. It should be something you like to do. It shouldn't be like, I have to do a 50% water change every other day to keep my nitrates below a certain threshold, And so if you have too many fish that you can't keep your nitrates where you'd like them, you know, within a relatively normal range, you probably have too many fish in there.
Yeah.
Or you're overfeeding, or and overfeeding will overstock your tank automatically, chemically.
Yeah, you don't
biologically
really
speaking.
feed your fish, right? You're feeding your filter on some level.
That's definitely true. That's actually the first time I've heard someone else use that term, because I've heard it 1,000 times. Yeah, feeding your filter. I've heard it 1,000 times in, again, the aquarium trade, and it's just like, I can't, Like,
Right,
they asked me, they were like, what do you think is an appropriate level for nitrates in a tank? And I said 75 is about my max for parts per million of nitrates in a tank, because after that, the nitrogen cycle has the ability to run in reverse, and you lose beneficial bacteria because you might have other bacterial things that pop up and take the available space that beneficial bacteria does.
so
And they were
essentially
like, yeah, go.
so essentially, just what you're saying. So basically what happens is about 80, because 80 is where it like grades generally on the tests. Like 80 parts per million is about the max you should go, because after that, any ammonia spike could be terrible because it won't filter through.
Yeah, because you've already reached a high capacity for your bacteria, right? Not just your filter, not just your media, not just anything, right? It's the water itself is almost at full capacity. And they told me, they were like, they have a cat shark tank that's a touch tank. It is a touch tank, granted. So like, I guarantee you, it's dirty water comparably to anything else available. But it's like 573 or something like that for nitrates, and I'm like, I don't understand how you could be so analytical about the amount of nitrates within a water system to the point where 100 is too much. But then when it comes to a specific animal, you're like, yes, sharks can handle nitrates. We've seen it. Theirs is at 574 or something like that, right?
Right. And so I guess the thing to make
My
the
gills
point.
are burning now.
What?
I said my gills are burning right now.
I guess the point to make is that nitrate in and of itself, the the science is still kind of, I can't find any sources that say one way or the other that nitrate is necessarily harmful. It's usually the effects of the nitrate on the microbiome that causes problems.
It's true.
And so basically, the higher your nitrate is, the more risk you run of, like, if a fish doesn't make it and you have an ammonia spike for some reason, or you overfeed, or something happens, you make a small mistake, like, oh, I accidentally put one pinch too many. Now you have an ammonia spike and all your fish die because your filter isn't able to handle it.
I'd have to look into it again, and this isn't harm to the fish, but I do remember there being some studies on nitrate levels and like that muddy taste that some farmed fish seem to have, and nitrate levels were directly corresponded to what fish people like in blind taste trials. The fish that had the higher nitrates were the fish that people identified as tasting muddy.
Interesting.
Again, I'd have to reread into that because it's been a long time since I was looking into it, but
I think
that's not harm.
Is
Right.
that do you think that that would have been caused by the microbiome or the macrobiome that they were eating? So like I'm thinking specifically of like goldfish, right? If I have goldfish, they're going to eat dirt, they're going to eat all of the random mud and junk in the
Yeah.
dirt, and then they're also going to eat everything else.
Yeah, it's. I mean, again, I'd have to look into it, and you want to look into probably multiple studies on that case. But it's one of those where, yeah, in the case of tilapia, they're eating predominantly pellets in that case,
Yeah.
or each other.
The tilapia, they eat each other as much as they want.
Yeah, water quality is going to be paramount, I think. I don't know.
Well, and if
Some
you have
of those. Sorry,
if you
go
have
on, Edison.
yeah, if you have a fish farm that doesn't really pay attention to what they're doing, most people tend to overfeed their fish on accident. Just naturally, it's like, oh, the fish is hungry, feeds it 3 times a day. You know what I mean?
Handfuls.
Yeah,
Handfuls.
handfuls 3 times a day. It's gonna cause higher nitrates. So it's like, it's kind of hard to say like what would be the problem.
Yeah. Is the nitrate the cause, or is that the correlating factor?
I'm assuming, and I think we've already touched on this many times, but it is probably the correlating factor in the sense that nitrates being high allows for other bacterias to bloom the same way that beneficial bacterias do. So things that would cause internal parasites or internal problems with a fish bacterially, swim bladder disease being one of those things, right? They now have a refuge to just breed, unequivocally without, end, right? And so I think it's partial, right? I overfeed, but only once per day. I have such a hard time skipping a day, I swear, because they give me a sad face. I feel you, Zen. I feel you.
Right, and I noticed that food drives a lot of the ammonia, the nitrogen cycle. Uh, so much so that like I can go like without seeing any ammonia in the beta cups at work. That I hate, absolutely hate. Um, but I can go without seeing any ammonia in the beta cups until I feed them,
Yeah.
and then I feed them, and then all of a sudden there's ammonia in there.
And that's kind of, I guess, leading up to what work of Aqua Advisor does, right? Aqua Advisor is a great system online. Mind you, there's two really big flaws with it, but there's a great system online that allows you to say, hey, I have all these fish. I have this amount of tank available. I have this amount of filtration available. It'll tell you your stocking level. Now, the two problems with that is it doesn't take into account the thing that we just said, that Edison just explained. What happens if you overfeed, right? Because it's not taking that into account. It takes into account the amount on an average day you feed with the output of the fish, aka its defecation and urine, right? And then secondly, the people who did those studies, they did amazing work. They were awesome. They were done out of China. There was 2 grad students that decided to make this website readily available for everybody to do it, right? It was done in 2009. And now we are approaching almost, 16 years or 14 years. Yeah, 16 years later, we don't have any of the new updated species. We don't have any of the new research that shows that, hey, goldfish are freaking nasty and this is how much they poop, right? And they have this extent. They don't include anything about invertebrate additives, in the sense that invertebrates are so minute on their scaling comparably to what invertebrates do. I don't know if any of you have ever kept jellyfish, but don't. They are gross as all hell.
Or like
And
urchins.
Yeah, urchins too. All of those invertebrates, they have so much waste to them that they are so, it's just difficult, right? And so when push comes to shove, it's a great system. It's a great way to predict, but it is never the best way to be like, yes, this is exactly what's happening.
Sorry, the sun just went down and all my lights are tied to it.
Oh. But so, like I say,
Coro.
you can chemically keep you can biologically keep stocking low if you don't overfeed your fish. And so that's generally what, when people come in and they want to start a new fish tank and put the fish in immediately, I'm like, okay, feed every other day. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, feed every other day.
Well, also, there's outside of the other benefits with that too, right? We want to make sure that, especially people who don't know fish tanks, I always tell them to underfeed over versus overfeed. You
Right.
are feeding your fish enough already.
Right. There's no reason, and like I'll hand them the small jar of fish food and say this should last you like a long time. Especially if you just have like one beta. It should not last, it should not like go away in a week, you know what I mean?
I'm now curious because I've seen his tank for a little bit. What is in your tank, sir?
So I've got some El Tigre Endlers and a beta in here, and too many ram's horns. But we got a beta boy and mostly female El Tigres. There's a couple. Focus. There's a couple males in there still. They're not doing super hot prey, probably because the beta is predating on them a little bit heavier.
Yeah. I mean, that's what betas and gouramis are good for. Is keeping populations under control.
Yeah. Well, endlers, if they're pure line endlers, they don't seem to be too bad. But then I got a jungle in a grow bed up top, and a jungle in the tank in Vallisneria, and a big sump. I mean, big, 10 gallons. Big for a 20.
Big for a freshwater tank. Anyway. That's cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
But
well,
yeah, jungle up top is getting to be a little bit too much. I'm going to have to move soon, and I don't know how I'm going to do that.
Luckily, though, I mean, when we're talking about carrying capacity and stuff, plants do a really good job not buffering the capacity, but they are a very good cushion, I guess, for the fall, right?
Yeah.
And semi-aquatic plants are really good too, because the limiting factor in all aquarium plants is carbon dioxide by far, right? But semi-aquatic, that is not the limiting factor. The limiting factor is nutrients, and so it works out better for yeah.
And that leads us to algae too. If you have a biologically overstocked tank, you're going to have an algae problem.
Usually, yeah.
There's no if and or buts. You have an algae problem.
They asked me during the interview this last week, they were like, what do you do with like biocerites? So like hair algae, right? And I was like, well, there's an imbalance. If you have too much nutrients or you have too much light, you will have algae. And they were like, okay, what would you do? You could pay someone to scrub the tank consistently every week after week, or the smart thing, figuring out what your imbalance is and then correcting for it, right? Because eventually the population takes care of itself.
And to be honest, what I do at work, because we use tap water for our saltwater tanks, so it has a lot more nutrients. So we have hair algae, but what I do is I just throw it in the tank with the tangs, something to kind of help eat the algae.
Yeah, tangs love algae.
Oh yeah, that's like their whole diet, you know. And so to throw it in there, and then it kind of helps balance it out in a sense, because you can't do anything about that balance. But animals generally aren't the best solution for algae.
Yeah, you can't out-eat an algae problem, you know?
You try.
Like, you can buy a goat, and that goat will out-eat your lawn, don't get me wrong. But that's because the goat, like, you know, the goat's not shitting, the goat isn't shitting into the lawn as fast as the fish shits into the fish tank, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And grass doesn't grow as fast as algae does.
Right, and that's one thing I hate explaining to everybody at work all the time. Hey, I need a pleco for my tank. No, you don't. You do not want a pleco.
No.
Same
You want
thing
a
with
pleco because
autos,
you want
right?
a pleco.
People who buy autos, I feel like for the same reason, right? They will buy autos, and then all of a sudden, the algae is not enough to sustain the entire population, and so they end up fighting over after it, and then you have no population anymore.
Well, not to mention that the algae will take nutrients out of the water column and make it algae, where the fish that eat the algae are putting that nutrient back into the water column.
Yeah, that's another difference with terrestrial plants compared to aquatic plants or like anything else in your water column, right? If you have an algae scrubber in your sump, in like a saltwater tank, right? You have to remove the algae in order for that to count as nutrient export. You have to scrape it out off the algae scrubber and throw that stuff in the trash can. All of the plants that grow out the top of your tank, if they die, and as long as that leaf isn't dying into your tank water, who cares? You know, if it grows too far away from the light and it wilts a little bit and a part of the vine falls off, it's no big deal. I mean, yeah, you don't want it on your carpet or anything. Pick it up. Don't be a hazard. But
Don't be lazy.
yeah, don't be lazy. But at the same time, it's not the same as when you don't trim your plants or you don't remove algae and something eats that algae and poops it back out.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the end of my story.
Then it just becomes how much light do you have? Because if you don't have enough light, then it's just going to keep it in the water column, which means more ammonia, which means more nutrients, which means problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with what people are saying also in chat too, because people are talking about like CO2 imbalances because of and then fixing that with human intervention. It takes human intervention to run an aquarium. It takes human intervention to make sure your fish are safe, right? You can do the Wallstead method, but very few people realize that the Wallstead method is a lot of oscillation, right? You have to find that point where your populations are going to control themselves versus them, you perpetually just having something that's just going to have a lot of life, right? And then snails are a huge blessing in disguise for a lot of people, and a lot of people hate them. And I understand it. I get it. I understand. Snails are ugly. Good. I'm an invertebrate zoologist. I'm one of the few that love snails. Okay. Literally, when they said, "What are you excited to work with at the Akron Zoo?" There is an extinct species of snail at the Akron Zoo that they grow out to go back to Fiji. And I am so excited to yes, you are my child now. Right?
That's cool.
But I'm one of the few. People hate snails. It's just the nature of what snails are. And so, along with terrestrial plants, semi-aquatics, and snails, those are really good buffers for everything. So,
right.
I guess those are my 2 cents.
I guess the problem with snails generally comes from overfeeding, which over nutrients the tank. So it's all about controlling, I guess, to keep algae growth down, to keep chemicals, within limits, to not have to do giant water changes all the time. You just have to watch what you're feeding. Fish are cold-blooded.
I farm snails, lol.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just dump a whole bottle of food in there and watch the snails go nuts.
Like you're saying, it adds capacity, right? Well, not capacity, but buffer.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to delay the effects of the overfeeding because the snails are going to hit that effect before the chemistry feels it, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. You're going to have a snail population explosion instead of an ammonia spike, which is good.
Yeah.
Just sucks.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about like live snails versus dead snails. Dead snails are going to release their ammonia, where live snails are going to keep their ammonia inside of them. And so that helps mitigate a lot of problems before they become a huge problem.
It's true.
And snails are a lot easier to remove from the water than ammonia.
What a concept. A figurative invisible chemical versus an actual physical being.
Right.
Being able to remove. Yeah. I definitely understand that and get it.
But then it all comes back to these three kind of guidelines. They're guidelines. A lot of it comes down to a judgment call with stocking. You can't just say like, oh, this tank is overstocked. Yeah, some tanks you can definitely say they're overstocked, but some of them it's kind of in its own realm.
A lot of
Yeah.
times you look at a tank and just like it looks like it's a certain size tank, but you have no clue what size tank that is, and then the person says what size it is or what dimensions it is, and you're like, that must be a giant fish, or maybe maybe the
Yeah.
angles.
I love people online for that reason too, because they are so quick. It's polarizing, right? There's either people that are like, no, that's fine. Especially in this, I don't want to keep going back to Cichlid Florida Man, but Cichlid Florida Man is definitely, yeah, that's fine. Right. And then on the other side, there's people who are like, no, you're doing it wrong. You need to do more water changes. Right. And again, we don't know the whole story because each fish is different.
Yeah. I will say none of those buffers that we were talking about replace water changes.
No.
Oh, absolutely not. No way.
Nutrient export, yes, not a water change.
No, and to be honest, there has been even studies that show unless it's a very fast metabolizing plant. So I'm talking bamboo or some sorts of pathos or spider plants. But even then, those are very slow comparably to bamboo, right? Their respiration output is not nearly what it should be to make a conditional effect on the overall, like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Spider plants, pathos, bamboo. Yeah.
I just did all these babies the other day from the spider plants because they've been going nuts.
Yeah. But the respiration, the actual act of the plant being a plant and living and taking in nutrients doesn't actively take as much nutrients out of the water column that a lot of people think it does. A lot of people think, oh yeah, this is going to lower my parts per million by 1 or 2. It's literally parts per almost quadrillion, parts per trillion sometimes, right? You're talking about numbers so small that you can't even measure them half the time. And so they do provide that buffer, but it's not nearly as much as people consider to be like, oh, I could just wait a day because I have plants, right?
Yeah. You can wait a day because you have biological filtration.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You can wait a day because your biological filtration is enough to keep up with your ammonia output.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can wait a day because your tank is cycled, but you can't wait a month.
Yeah.
You'll have problems.
Everybody in Florida.
You might be able to do the same thing with the Wallstead method, right? Like it's all about stocking. If you're like the Wallstead method does not do overstocked tanks. You
No.
can't. And
in fact, it leans to understocking.
Like where you're trying to filter your tank and make it all no water changes and have it all be plants taken out from the top, you might be able to keep one betta in a 20 or 30 gallon tank.
The amount of just work to get to negate fish, things with vertebrae are messy, right? So,
and they're constantly like plants follow photoperiods, right?
Yeah.
And they take in nutrients during certain time periods and they burn those nutrients during other time periods and they respirate and they aspirate and whatever else. And it's all based on day and night cycles. And if you don't follow those day and night cycles, the plant will not be at its utmost efficiency. Fish breathe all the time. So
what a concept. Fish has lungs.
Yeah, I don't know. It's in the real world, right? When we're not talking about an aquarium, fish are in a large enough body of water, or people are in a large enough body of air to where anything we pollute is diluted enough that it won't kill us unless you're like trapped in a basement. you know?
It's true.
And even then, like, you'll have long enough to know you've made a mistake before you die in the basement.
This is carbon monoxide in your sleep, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't have very long to understand that. You would just go to sleep and never wake up.
Yeah, you wouldn't really understand.
Or just wake up.
Wake up at the pearly gates. What the hell?
Zen Ginger asks a question. What if you have water like mine, pH 7.5, KH 5, GH 9, but with 0.5 ammonia, 0.25 phosphate, 2.0 nitrite, and 40 ppm nitrates? Is doing frequent water changes stressful? Should I let the cycle catch up between? No. If you have, if
I would
how-
say your ammonia and nitrite is kind of scary, so I would
Right.
do water changes.
I would do water changes. Keep it as low
That's
as
for tap
possible.
water.
Oh, that's for tap water?
Just to clarify, that's she's been dealing with this issue for a minute. Sorry. I have
Oh,
Okay.
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 If this is just her tap, yeah, okay, yeah. I would say then, if this is her tap water, I would do an RO with remineralization. And I hate to say it, but you're doing your fish a disservice if you are not treating right, because if you're taking out dirty water to just replace it with probably just as dirty water, right, it's not probably beneficial to them, right? You can obviously rely on the other methods of, filtration from your house, like getting a soft water filter, or even also, I don't want to say you can boil water and then do evaporative drops, but I mean, I've seen people do it just because water be dirty.
I mean, I have I wouldn't recommend it. An RO unit is better, more cost effective. But, and I know this because I wasted my money.
Said
But I
every
have a
aquarist ever.
water unit that like plugs into the wall and does a gallon of water in like 3 hours. It takes.
Oh.
I don't know how it takes so long. Waste of money. But
yeah, and I would say RO because I found
some other way, or you can't install an RO unit for whatever reason.
the cheapest ones. Yeah, there are other options. I did find online because I had to do this when I worked for the aquarium. Not for the aquarium, but when I worked as an intern at the university, they had the same copper pipes in the building from 1923, right? And those are not healthy for any fish.
Yeah.
And we got an RO system. It was $68, and it was a 1/4 like little hang off that you put in between your line of a sink, and that was it, right? It didn't come with any container. It didn't come with any like holding, right? So you just need an extra tank for that, or an extra basically barrel. But
0.4 gallons per minute or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very minimal, right? You can leave it on overnight if you had an empty bucket and you had the availability, right?
Yeah.
But it would ensure that you had clean water at the end. And then for remineralization, right, just do a remineralizer, right? Because they sell those online all the time.
So, question. If in Zen's case, we're only worried about that 0.5 ammonia and the nitrate, the nitrite, the 2 nitrite, because the nitrates are down at 40, and that's 40 parts per million is not that big of a deal.
No.
Is there any reason why you couldn't like fill a brute bucket or something with water that you're going to water change with, and then filter that with just biological filtration to get your ammonia and nitrite out of the way?
You would add nitrates because that's...
Yeah, it's going to increase your nitrate overall.
Right. What I understand is, since we're talking one molecule of based off one molecule of ammonia is going to equate to one molecule of nitrate, which means 1 part per million of ammonia is going to turn into 1 part per million of nitrate, right?
Yeah.
I'm not like, okay. So in theory, that would bump it up, I guess, a negligible amount. So yeah, you
I
could do
mean,
water
yeah,
changes
I
with
would
that.
I would say that would be fine in my mind, right? It would be hard, right? Because you have as much beneficial bacteria that fits at that temperature and at that current flow for that filter, right? And what happens usually if you just put a filter on a bucket, you don't have the temperature. If you put temperature in a bucket, usually it's too hot. And so you end up killing beneficial bacteria. And so if you can replicate the same conditions of your tank in that bucket, yeah, fine, do that because that's the only option you have, right? But odds of you being able to replicate it to the point where it's usable is very difficult, and it would take a lot of trial and error, but you could probably do it, right?
If you're so like, I'm imagining one of those like 35-gallon or larger trash cans, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, do it.
You couldn't just throw a couple sponge filters in the bottom of that?
I mean, like I said, I would do it personally, but I would also need to make sure that the temperature is the exact same and that the beneficial
And
bacteria
temperature is
stays
going to
alive,
help
right?
the bacteria the temperature is going to help the bacteria be able to filter it faster too.
That's true too.
That's my cue. So I'm gonna bid you
Bye,
adieu.
Caro.
Thank you for having me up.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
for coming
joining.
on.
Yeah, I'm glad
We'll
to have
have
found
to,
you guys. And
yeah,
we'll
we'll have to reach out to you again because we desperately need someone else to come and be a part of this because we suck.
you guys don't suck. You're both very educated, and it sounds like you have a lot of experience. You understand the science better than I do in a lot of ways.
Oh, you found it.
Thanks.
I think you
We
guys
appreciate.
are on a good setup for sure.
We appreciate. We'll be in contact though. So Edison, make sure you give him a shout back. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have his email now.
Yes.
No worries. See you guys around.
Okay.
See ya.
Yeah, thanks, Coro. But yeah, so I guess in that case it would be it'd be one of those like it's a judgment call. A lot of the times with aquariums, everything is comes down to a judgment call. How well do you know your system? How well do you know what your filtration's doing and whatnot? And so it's like, yes, you could probably get your own and you could seed filters for different purposes, different things, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like in a mature planted tank, yeah, sure, go ahead and dump that tap water in there. That's fine. But they're wondering about like a fry tank and whatnot. Like, what do you do then? Again, nitrates aren't what I would worry about with fry. I know that they can affect the fry in some sense, but
They're not. It's not like an immediate effect like nitrite.
right,
It worries me sometimes, right? Where someone, if you're looking at hand over fist the thing that would kill your fish, right? It is not the nitrate. It is the thing leading up to too many nitrates, which is nitrite and ammonia. And I think it all boils back down, and I guess this is in closing too, right? We talk about it a lot here, but it's a little bit of discipline, right? When we talk about things like keeping aquariums and fish, you have to have not only the discipline to say, yes, I'm going to go do this thing right now, but also the discipline to say, no, I am not going to go buy another fish, Edison. And then, it's kind of like the crazy cat lady. How many cats can a crazy cat lady own? As many as it's going to take before she dies of being, tripping over one of her cats and one of them eats her, right? And so, like, it's one of those things where, like, try to use turkey basters to remove food, replacing as little as possible, constantly adding prime. Prime also, we kind of covered this before with Kyle back on here, but it locks it in place. It doesn't just immediately remove it. So just be careful. It buys you time, but it's a ticking time bomb.
right. It's kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. But that was awesome today. Thanks, guys, for being a part of us. We can't continue to have fun just by being two random dudes talking over the internet the entire time. And so it's really interesting to actually have people come and like talk to us. We really appreciate it. So until next time, I am Chris,
And I'm Edison.
and this is Tanks and Thanks.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks, guys.